Morning, everybody, and thank you very much for logging on this morning for this session. If you got my email this morning, you will have noticed that bypassing session 3, which is the business process mapping module, and my good friend and colleague Brian Schneider and I are working on a brand new module that we will jointly present in a couple of weeks' time. It's a hands-on business process mapping workshop, very different, very exciting. Brian and I have run it before for various clients, and so I think you'll find it very exciting. So without further ado, we're going to leap right into session number 4 and 5, which is our performance measurement and quality assurance. I'll go for about 60 minutes and then take a 5-minute break, and let's see if we can get through all of the content today, all in one session. So, I'm still muted. It says I'm muted, but anyway, can everybody hear me? Can anybody put something in the chat line? My screen is saying I'm muted. So let me just check that. Okay, so you can hear me. That's great. Thanks a million. Right, let's proceed straight into session 4. First, just a little word from our sponsors, if I may. And that is, I'll just start from the top and I'll be very brief on it. Corby Speech Analytics, which is the South African developed speech analytics tool that specializes in South African English, Afrikaans, isiZulu, and Sesotho. If anybody is interested in more information on this or would like to have a demonstration, please let me know. Smart Solutions is one of the best kept secrets in call center technologies. Based here in South Africa, both operations throughout the world now and very strong in the US. So with Smart Solutions, it's everything you've ever dreamed about having as a call center platform: omni-channel, human asset management, workforce management. It has social media integration and everything, as I said, that you've ever dreamed of. IntelliBPO, based down in Durban, and we're very pleased to have Jackie with us today representing IntelliBPO. New BPO on the block, highly enhanced technologies using smart technologies, very geared towards digital support in the BPO space. And Axtel headsets, and I'm very pleased to say that today I've got my beautiful new Axtel headset. Audio is brilliant, it's very comfortable, highly durable. Based down in Durban, Axtel headsets, in fact, are manufactured in Poland to very strict European Union specifications and standards for both quality and safety. So, and they are cost competitive in the South African environment as well, or in that matter, for that matter, anywhere. So there are the commercials for the day. So this is what we'll be talking about today. As you can see, we've jumped straight through to sessions 4 and 5. The first part, performance measurement and performance management. And then we'll go on to quality assurance and performance management through quality. Bearing in mind, if you haven't already been on these sessions, these are sessions where it's not training, as you well know. It's about stimulating ideas, and where possible, I will give what is recognized as being best practice. And so I would really like to see some dialogue, so please feel free to jump in, put your hand up if you'd like to contribute to the discussions. If you can keep it brief, but we'd love to hear from you. We have a fairly small group today, and so we can have some interaction. Also bear in mind that all of these sessions are being recorded. I will edit them and put them up on the YouTube channel later this afternoon for you to review or to share with colleagues. And in fact, I've had a whole string of people requesting merely access to the recordings. They're unable to make the time to log in on these sessions. So feel free to do that as well with colleagues. Going forward, here we go. I just wanted to kick off with some thoughts about KPIs, and we bandy around KPIs in our call centers. We discussed it I think in our first session when we were looking at world-class contact centers. One of the fundamentals there is we need to define our KPIs very carefully if we are to be a world-class contact center. And then, of course, adhere to those KPIs, monitor them, and continuously look to improve them. So these are a few ideas that I've put together around KPIs. So let's first and foremost have a look at, what does it take to qualify as a KPI? Fundamentals, yes, basic principles. We must link a KPI to a business objective. If a KPI is standing on its own and has no particular relevance to a business objective, then it's not really an operational metric, and we have to dig down and decide whether we're going to retain that particular KPI or redefine it, or make sure that it is linked to a very specific business objective, and I'll expand on that in a few moments. A KPI should be meaningful to business stakeholders. When you come to think of it, many call center agents are being held accountable to certain KPIs, very clearly defined, and their performance is measured against that. But if they cannot contextualize their role to that particular KPI, or if they have no control over it, or inputs to how it's defined, it makes it very difficult to implement that. It makes it difficult for the agents to understand it, and very often we'll start getting some serious kickback unless they can see why this KPI is so important in their context. We'll address that a little later when we dig into some of the schedule adherence issues. Context. A KPI standing on its own. So yesterday, let's say, for example, my call abandon rates were 7%. Well, so what? What's the context of it? What was it the day before? What is it we want it to be? So we've got to be able to, in all cases, take our KPIs and contextualize it to something else, and I'll expand on that shortly. Well-defined and easy to understand, no ambiguous interpretations. Out of interest, I think I mentioned it in our first session, the South African standards for contact centers going back to 2008 were the first ever in the world as a set of operational standards for call centers. Now, one of the several reasons why the Department of Trade and Industry and various other bodies funded the development of those standards was to try and overcome the reality that we have so many different definitions of standards and KPIs in our call centers. If we talk about abandon rates, there are possibly 8 or 10 different ways in which abandon rates could be measured. And so it's important to have that documentation available to everybody in the contact centers, so they understand how that KPI is measured, why it's measured, and of course the business objective behind it. So every KPI, we have to show those expectations, allow ourselves to set targets as opposed to being a static figure which we just adhere to or strive to adhere to. So stretch targets are an important component of our KPIs. And of course, every KPI must drive some sort of action to improve, to change a performance, to change behaviors, to change systems. And unless the KPI actually has a very specific drive, an action-orientated drive, it's kind of pointless. So once again, just to review on that, link it to a business objective, make it meaningful, provide some context, well-defined, and drive actions. So I'm quite sure a lot of people looking at this are thinking of their own KPIs and thinking maybe we need to go back to the drawing board, at least to refine them. So here we have this note about the link to a business objective. So let's stop and ask ourselves about every one of our KPIs, and depending on how many you've got. I mean, there are some contact centers that I know of that might have anything up to 100 KPIs, whereas others, I think it's perfectly feasible to run a contact center effectively on a considerably less than 100 KPIs. So first question we need to ask ourselves, why on earth are we measuring this particular function in our call center? And it's important that we are able to verbalize that and express it and to document it and to share that information. So let's stop merely measuring and presenting reports on KPIs unless we really know why we are doing it. And behind every KPI, there's raw data. So very often it's important to go back into the raw data and not simply take the summary figures or summary tables or summary reports and really look at that data. In a future session, we're looking at data analytics and how much more rich information we can get out of raw back-end data. For example, all of that rich information that's held in the ACD. I see we have John Bolton logged in today. Hi, John. Thanks for joining us today. If anybody is interested in really stretching KPIs and understanding them and seeing dashboards that you've never seen coming out of your basic ACD, get in touch with John, and I'm quite sure he'll be happy to share with you that. So there's the third point. What business objective does the KPI support? And very important is, what is the business impact if this KPI gets better or it gets worse? So we need to really look at that in a lot of detail, and I'll drill down onto that shortly. So many systems have so many different reports, and we tend to look at this and we look at that, but what happens if we overlay all of that information? Once again, this is something we'll expand on in a future session when we'll be looking at analytics and reporting. I might even ask John Bolton to join me on that session and to co-present, because he's got some really exciting stuff to share. So if we overlay one set of data with another, there very often will emerge another finding, if you like, something, an insight, a deep insight that can help us drive better performance. And then, of course, what actions can we drive with that data? So there's a lot of homework to be done here if we move into it. Lastly, on this particular set of tables, if you like, what strategic business intelligence can I obtain from the data? This also points to our relationship, when I say ours in contact center operations, our relationship with the boardroom. What is it that the boardroom needs to know to drive the organization onwards and upwards towards better profitability, market share, etc., etc. So strategic business intelligence coming out of the contact center, if it's done correctly and if it's fed into the organizational structures correctly, can be extremely valuable. And it's a point that I think we all have to be aware of, is we need to change the perspective of contact center from being, in many cases, that reluctantly funded annual budget as a cost center to a value center, and ultimately to being seen as an incredibly important part of the organization's profits. So this little hypothetical table that we put together a little while back really talks to the ideal world, where we would have a set of historical data points for our KPIs. We would then look at our target data points driving us onwards and upwards to boost better performance. From that, we'll be able to pick up a trend line. And then we need to look at the business impact of that trend, whether it is positive or negative. We also need to look at what needs to be done. If it's trending in a positive way, a positive business impact, what do we need to do to actually continue to drive for even better performance? If it's heading in a negative sense, what needs to be done to circumvent that negative drive and turn it around into a positive impact. So let's not simply look at a data point and say that's our KPI. This is a table which is built purely on a very simple piece of Excel, which picks up on this model and says, let's take every one of our KPIs, and if there are 10 or 20 or 30 or whatever it is, the first and foremost define what it is. For example, here's your average talk time. Why is it important? Oops, too fast. Why is it important? And some of these may be pretty obvious, but it's important to document it so that, for example, even engagements with new entry agents coming into the contact center, we're able to describe very clearly why it is that this KPI is important. Then let's start picking up on historical data points. And if there are 10, if there are 20, if there are 50, the longer we can look back into the past, the clearer we'll be able to get a picture of how that particular KPI is performing. We then start setting our goal or target, and we might enter into a system and do this for some clients where we have a baseline target, we have a standards-based target, which is either the SABS standards, ISO standards, or any of the other globally recognized standards. And then we have goals and stretch targets as well. We then start picking up, if we were preparing a report, is this KPI, is it trending positive or negative? We need then a short statement as to what is driving that particular trend. There's certainly going to be reasons, whether it is marketing activity, poor product performance, competitive activity out there, staffing issues in the call center, technical issues, communication issues. Something will be driving that trend. If we take average talk time, why is it, for example, trending from 3 minutes to 5 minutes? Is it a training issue? Is it access to information issue? Is it more demanding customers? But nonetheless, let's identify what those issues are. Critically important here, business impact. If, for example, our average talk time is stretching, it's becoming far longer over a period of time, what is the impact of that on the business? Well, certainly in terms of resourcing, capacity, it's going to put strain on that. Every minute that ticks away costs money. And so that will have a financial impact as well, which is our next column. Very difficult, but in my opinion, absolutely essential that we take every KPI and we associate it with a financial impact, so that when we see a trend in the positive direction, we can see financial savings perhaps, and we see certain other KPIs falling in a negative impact, we can see increased costs. Here is where we would start inserting bullet point actions. What do we need to do to turn this trend around? And let's assign it to a particular person, and let's set some key deadlines or dates to it. So, you know, presenting the weekly, monthly stats figures to whoever the executive or manager responsible is no longer just, here are my stats, here's the standard reports coming out of the ACD. Not good enough. Where we have tables like this, executives will start taking us a lot more serious. Yes, it is hard work to set it up the first time round, but thereafter, relatively easy, and it should become a part of the standard practice every month, is to maintain and to develop your own tables such as this. If your contact center needs some help in putting these together, just drop me a line and we can certainly help with some models, tables, or refer you to some specialists. There's a little booklet available on my website, Boost Productivity, the right contact center KPIs. I've put this together based on information freely available in the world on the nets. But it's a handy handbook, if you like, to have it on hand just to check. Free download, just go on my website and you'll find a copy of it there. All right, so once again, very basic, and I did say to you right up front, this is contact center 101 stuff, and it's really there to take us back to basics in some cases. It's also there to give you materials to use in engagements with your own staff or newcomers to the industry, new agents, for example. I said all of these slides are available. I have put the PDFs into Dropbox, so please feel free to have a look at that. Misa's question, how do we measure first contact resolution? Absolutely, good question. And I think we'll come on to that in a section in a few slides from now. But it's a really good question, and I think we'll open that to the panel shortly. Thanks for that one. Right, let's have a look at some operational terms, because each one of these operational terms is also an indicator of where we need to start identifying KPIs. So call arrival into the ACD, automatic call distributor. Let's look at that ring time in seconds. Call answered by the ACD, and typically we would have music on hold or messages, or it's our entry into our IVR system. And that's another topic we'll discuss in greater detail. Call answered, we then have our queue time. And if we take that further, our speed to answer or average speed to answer, once again, a very important KPI to look at, because this will indicate tolerance levels by our customers. And particularly if we start getting abandons within this space here, we need to start understanding what is driving those abandon rates. Is it purely because of frustration on time to answer, or is it something in the IVR? Is it the way the IVR is put together? There's got to be some reason. So each one of these we need to measure. There's our talk time, and very important to look at that, not only in terms of customer satisfaction and being able to provide that first contact resolution or the correct information, but every second that ticks away in our call center is costing money. And so really important to monitor that as we go ahead. After call work time or pause time between calls, very important to have that. If we push that too tight or shorten that time, we are certainly going to have agent burnout, in which case they will start using all sorts of shenanigans to avoid calls. But nonetheless, that wrap time can be very important as well as a means of gathering additional information from agents based on a very simple, if necessary, tick sheet, manual operated or manually completed tick sheet, or preferably a system-based on-screen tick sheet where we can identify call types, customer attitudes, 2 or 3 other points might be valuable. So let's have a look at that as well and monitor that. And there's our total handling time. So each one of these is going to be really important to keep an eye on. Some of them have to do with operational efficiency. Some of them, as you will appreciate, have to do with capacity and connectivity and technical issues as well. So just some very basics. Now, each one of these should become a measurable, we call it a KPI if you like, in our reporting system. Trunk holding time in the older systems, trunk holding time, bandwidth utilization would be the comparison in the VoIP environment. But in the TDM environment, the older E1 type connectivity issues, trunk holding time and trunk capacity is going to be a really important point. We have a couple of situations with big call centers taking huge volumes of calls that they couldn't understand why they were getting so many complaints, and it fundamentally boiled down to insufficient trunk capacity. The calls were simply not going through to the contact center. Right, typical performance measures, and these are, yes, they might apply to some call centers and might not apply to others. So what I'm looking at here in this table, we do not take customer experience or call outcomes in terms of quality. into account in this particular model. So let's look at that average speed to answer, how long a caller waits until it is answered. Now, what we found was there are some guidelines for best practice on that, and I'll come on to service level shortly. In certain types of contact center operations, slightly longer speed to answer is perfectly acceptable by certain customers, whereas in others, a very fast time to, speed to answer is required. For example, emergency services. You wouldn't expect that to ring, for 30, 60 seconds or longer before it's answered. And now we come to this service level, and it's one of my hobby horses, this term service level, and I'm on a one-man mission to change that term from service level to operational capacity level, because the service level is so easily confused. Typically, and I've seen it happen where the senior executives of one organization standing on the golf course with his colleagues says, my contact center is fantastic. It's got a 95% service level. Meanwhile, the actual service is terrible. What he really meant to say is, I have enough capacity in my call center to answer those calls. So this percentage of calls answered in any given time, that typical factor, 80% of calls answered in 20 seconds. It's an interesting figure that in my 45 years in call centers, and I've dug around looking for the origin of that. And I cannot find where that original 80% of calls answered in 20 seconds came from. It's a good rule of thumb. I'm not denying that. But I think one should also be flexible. Certain types of calls, certain call centers, under certain circumstances, this service level should be flexible enough for the organization to redefine it for themselves, as opposed to penalizing the operation just because there's an arbitrary 80-20 service level figure. And bearing in mind, it's got nothing to do with actual service and everything to do with capacity, servicing the capacity going through it. Abandoned rate is another one that's caused a lot of confusion out there. The rule of thumb here is the percentage or the number of callers that hang up before being answered question by a live agent. And this is where we need to start redefining abandoned rates for our own operations. Because if we measure abandoned rates, perhaps if we're taking into account short calls under 5 seconds, and we're taking those into our abandoned rates, this is going to skew our predictions and our planning, because many of those calls might be simply that a caller came through, is either interrupted and hung up their call, or might have come through to the IVR and realized that they dialed a wrong number. So, how we define short calls in our abandoned rates is something that we need to discuss internally, and for the organization to have its own definition for that. Once again, if we go into the IVR and we start analyzing abandoned rates within IVR, what is that telling us? Is it telling us that customers received the information they were looking for within the IVR and therefore hung up? Are they confused by the structures of the IVR system and therefore they hang up in frustration? Are they in a call holding pattern where the messages are just repetitive and that hold time becomes too long and they hang up for that reason? So really important that we start drilling down into abandon rate and fully defining for our own operation how we are measuring it. By all means, let's take internationally recognized best practice as a guideline on there, but be bold enough to redefine your own abandon rates and look into that data for what it should be telling us about our customers. Tolerance levels, frustration levels, structure of IVR, etc. Right, let's move on. Some more thoughts about KPIs, and back to my favorite definitions. And here's one of them. To measure the success of an operation, you need business-driven key performance indicators, prerequisites to move from reporting to actionable analytics. Many call centers that we go in and we consult to or we audit are simply pressing the buttons on the ACD and spitting out the standard reports week after week, month after month, without converting that incredibly valuable information that's buried in those reports into actionable analytics. Every single line item should be indicating to us how we can improve our operation. Little definitions again: quantifiable measures that help decision makers define and measure progress towards business goals. These are all Wikipedia definitions, by the way. KPIs, metrics that translate complex measures into a simple indicator that allow decision makers to assess the current situation quickly and to act quickly. So if we are just buried alive under numbers, without context, without meaning, without, for that matter, business impact and financial impact, we are just churning out numbers. So this is the case for real-time dashboards and concise management reporting. In today's world with the technologies at our disposal, this also opens up a wonderful world of automated alarms, triggers, messaging, etc. Once again, real-time dashboards, consolidating data from various parts of the operation and various technologies has become an absolutely critical tool for effective contact center management. So where do we go from here? What are the most important KPIs? Well, for every operation it's different, but this table I put together here, so let's have a look at those KPIs that drive efficiency. Now I've very clearly highlighted the green titles there that impact on the customer experience. Right, so the others have absolutely no bearing on the customer experience. I'll take you through that. So for example, gross call volume. Yes, critically important that we measure that. And in many cases, it's even critical to go right the way back to the origins of the calls and maybe in your telco provider's environment in the exchange to really measure call volumes before it is transmitted through trunking or through VoIP through to our operation. So vital that we monitor call volume in order to have sufficient capability and capacity. Wait time to connect. Yes, we need to understand that because it'll be an indicator of our operational structures, our workforce management and our capacity planning, but it's also important, that one is important to customers. That's why it's in the green. Call queue time, obviously important. We want to keep those within realistic limits and wherever possible strive to, without being ridiculous, making sure we have sufficient agents or workforce on hand to keep those queue times short, because time in the queue is effort. You saw from our session last week the impact of customer effort on customer loyalty and lifetime value of customers, and customer retention is critical. So call queue time, really important. Call abandon rate, as I mentioned in the previous slide, tells us a lot about the structure of our systems, our IVR systems, the nature of the customer, and by the customer, we might even be able to identify certain segments, customer segments, that respond differently. For example, I've seen it in a banking environment where the the top-end clients, the platinum clients, the top end of corporate clients calling the call center have very low tolerance levels, and anything over 15 or 20 seconds, you'll get a hang up, a call abandoned, whereas other segments might respond differently. There's our average handling time. Let's get on top of that. And let's start segmenting by call type. It's no good having just a defined average handling time for everybody across all call types. So every call type needs to be very clearly defined. If we go on a bit further here, we have after call wrap-up time, also very important, that we keep an eye on that and allow our agents sufficient time to catch breath and go on. Calls by agent, by hour, within whatever time they are. We have service levels. We have oops, too fast. Service level, that 80-20 rule of thumb, but let's monitor that. Customer satisfaction, absolutely critical in the world that we live in. So let's really, and we'll be looking at ways in which we should be carrying forward some of the stuff we learned in last week's session on how to measure that customer satisfaction. Cost per call. Now, tragically, this is the one which very few contact centers are on top of. There is a session coming up going forward. I'll bring in one of my professional colleagues to assist with that one. He has built the most remarkable costing models, and some of these spreadsheet tools will make available to anybody logging on those sessions. Schedule adherence, critical. And we can have a look at how we manage the staffing and how we manage our schedule adherence. But these are some of the things we really need to look at. Errors and rework. Now, one of the things that we pick up when we're doing call center audits and we start digging around looking for where are errors and rework being recorded. And sadly, very few contact centers actually measure that as a KPI. Amongst a few of my colleagues in the consulting profession, we have a kind of a consensus view that errors and rework, depending on the operation, but could amount to as much as 20%, if not higher, of your total resources in the call center could be wasted in errors and rework. And it starts from simple things like shoddy keyboard work and capturing data that goes through into the other systems, and it impacts down the line. It generates more inbound calls, etc., etc. So the impact of errors and rework is frightening. And I urge you to start looking at how do you measure and report on your errors and rework. Average call value, depending on the type of operation, whether it is collections or sales, etc., this becomes more important, and sales per hour if it's a sales type environment. So these are what I would call the typical KPIs that we might look at that are essentially focusing on efficiencies. There are a lot more, but we could expand on those in future sessions. And then the second part of that is then once we've got efficiencies, we can start looking at effectiveness. And this really is key factors in our total customer experience. So if I was starting up a brand new contact center and I have my new technology and I've recruited my new teams, etc., and I might look at, I say, startup measure as we kick off. First call resolution, 50% would be a kind of acceptable. Why is it so low? Well, we're still training staff, we're still developing processes, we're refining the operation, and that is one of the KPIs that we really need to drive. And I'll show you the target figures in a few moments. Customer satisfaction early on as high as 70, call quality, depending on how we measure it, but certainly up in the upper and the mid 70s. Product knowledge, and this will be an indication of our training and our knowledge management systems. Customer retention, where the contact center has control over such matters, being able to identify churn and turning customers around. Service level, as much as I hate that term, up in the 70s. Schedule adherence, this table I actually disagree with. I personally think schedule adherence It should be a lot higher even from day one. Forecasting accuracy, this is the role of the contact center manager. Once again, it's a little bit lower here in the startup phase because learning new systems. But where should we be in 12 months? These would be the figures that I would expect of a maturing contact center, where we've got our processes, we've got our systems in place. We are really starting to measure that first call or first contact resolution. We've got our systems delivering knowledge. We've got our agents well trained. Customer satisfaction, because we're doing the right things. Call quality is up at the 90s. Product knowledge by now should be right up at the 95 plus. Customer retention, service level, etc. Schedule adherence, even 95%. Maybe I'm old school, but contact center agent at the work desk, at the front line, taking calls is as important as the person on the motor assembly line, for example, whose job it is to put the wheels on. If he's not there to put the wheels on the car, the next workstation won't be able to put the hubcaps on, for example. So critically important that our agents start understanding schedule adherence, and that managers start becoming far more disciplined in ensuring that we have high levels of schedule adherence. So that will take us more into the effectiveness stage. And here's a very simple, oversimplified for that matter, chart on impact of staffing on service level. This particular slide goes back many years, 10 or 15 years ago, when I was doing induction training for new call center agents straight out of school into the contact center. And it was a short session that I ran. And it was really trying to explain the impact on the operation, on their colleagues, where service level, where staffing and schedule adherence is not being adhered to. So in this particular hypothetical example, based on whatever call volumes there might be, let's say we have 32 staff is our ideal, because we are answering 83% in this case in 15 seconds. And this hypothetical contact center, that's our service level standard. We've got low number of calls in the queues, slightly longer. We've got 11-second answer time, 32 people on staff. Everything's hunky-dory. This is a really nice, well-run contact center. But what if a number of agents were late coming back from a lunch break or a tea break, or just unscheduled absenteeism, and we start getting into these levels down here? If we had, for example, 27 agents, look what happens to the answer time. Look what happens to the answer rate, and look what happens to our long queues. This is where it is totally unacceptable to callers, and even to drop 1 or 2 agents late for shift, for example, this is the impact that it has. This is quite frightening, and when agents are trained to understand the impact that it has on the organization, the reason for this KPI, the impact that it has on colleagues, we start getting a better understanding. If we extend that a little bit further down here, and we have too many agents on the front line, just look what starts happening here. When our answer rates is under a second, we're 99% of our calls there with no queues. This is just excessive costs. And so the art and science of workforce management is to keep it right on that sweet spot here, where we're providing the optimum customer service without spending too much money. So is anything else coming in the Q&A? Any questions? Feel free to use the Q&A or the chat line, which is still open. I'll just make sure that that's there. Okay, moving on. So once again, very much similar, typical call arrival patterns in a typical call center. ranging from early morning, very low call volumes, to there's our peak just after 1300 or 1 o'clock. And we've decided that this is where our 100%, let's call it service level for now, should be. So that's our acceptable service level. Up here, totally unacceptable because we are understaffed. And down here, we have excessive service level. In other words, we're overstaffed and it's costly. So we need to start looking at and asking ourselves the question, how are we going to handle these peaks where we simply do not have the staff to manage those particular calls? And it's a strategic decision. Do we rely on an IVR system? Do we build in an automated callback system, for example? Do we pass some of these calls off to back office staff who might have just basic training in message taking, as simple as that, to take these high peaks? Or do we, for example, a client I'm working with at the moment has horrendous peaks at certain times of the day, and they simply could not staff those under any circumstances. So that is now under consideration to outsource and divert any calls beyond this threshold will go to an outsourced party to pick up that slack. So there's a long discussions, and every call center will be different, is how do we handle these peaks? Equally, how do we handle and what do we do with these troughs? Because right here, if, for example, we had our staffing complement in place for there, but there are no calls, what do we do to make sure that this is not wasted manpower or resourcing? And this is where, once again, depending on the contact center, we could start putting our agents onto outbound calls, customer data updates, verifications. We could put them into training. We could, depending on our technology platforms, we could start feeding them e-learning modules to keep them busy and productive in a sense during these lulls in the call volumes. Similarly, here we could start looking at it and saying from after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, our call volumes are dropping until go home time. So this is where, once again, admin, reporting, training, coaching, outbound calls. And so the astute contact center manager will be able to look at this and say, I have a plan to handle the peaks outside of my service level, and I have plans and processes in place to optimize my staff in when the call volumes dip below certain levels. So oversimplified, but nonetheless, hopefully it's a thought starter for operations. So staff retention and contact center career pathing. There's some very interesting stuff came out of a formal research report that I was party to, although it was nearly 10 years ago. It was based on about 600 interviews with call center agents. Many of them were fully employed with no intent to leave their particular positions. They'd been there, so long tenured agents, and others had recently left their employment or were job hopping. And so that research report, if anybody's interested in it, by the way, just email me. I call it an e-nag, and I'll send you the C3 Africa manpower, contact center manpower report. Bearing in mind it's 10 years old, but some of the insights out of that have recently been validated as well. So I've just put a few tactics and tips together here that certainly I have seen having very positive impact on staff retention, and therefore knock-on effect is when you've got retained and long tenured staff, they tend to be better performers and they tend to deliver better customer experience and shorter call handling times. So there's a lot to be said for retention and growing our frontline workers. So the first and foremost here is clearly define the roles within the contact center, so that we're bringing somebody in and not simply saying you're going to be a call center agent for the rest of your life, but let's clearly indicate the role of the contact center agent, and maybe, and I'll show you just now, some various levels we could have for contact center agent, rising up to becoming a super agent, and then of course your team leader or supervisor, depending how we define it, and then QA and other opportunities within the contact center. So a particular call center, no longer in operation, sadly, that I did a lot of work for. Some of you might remember iChoices. Now, back in the day, located in Randburg, the average staff turnover of average call centers in that area was ridiculous. It was in the 20 and 30%. iChoices maintained an under 3% staff turnover. And many of these tips and tactics come from the experience that I had working with the teams at iChoices back in the day. So some good, strong lessons to be learned. So let's define the roles within the contact center and write up concise role and job descriptions and desirable competencies. And this is one of my hobby horses. I'm very, very often, particularly doing audits, we ask to see job descriptions. And typical call center agent job description in many cases is a one-page document that basically says you're here to make calls, take calls, be nice to customers, and stick to the rules. End of story. We prefer to have very detailed job descriptions and desirable competencies. I think it's only fair, if we are going to be measuring agent performance, that they know right up front what are those competencies that we would expect of them. So if anybody's interested, I have templates on job descriptions and job competencies, and I'll gladly share those free of charge with anybody who's interested in them. But bear in mind, and don't be shocked by it, for example, a supervisor job description and competencies profile runs, wait for it, 23 pages of line items and competencies. But that's another story, and we'll discuss it in another module, how to use those. Tip number 3, define and make known all the remuneration and benefits appropriate to each role or job function. So even a first-time worker coming into our contact center, maybe straight out of school or first-time employment at entry-level rates, give them something to aspire to. So show them the remuneration of a senior agent. Show them the job description and the benefits and the remuneration of a assistant contact center manager, or even contact center, senior contact center manager. So there's got to be an aspiration, there's got to be a driver. Otherwise, you know, we're just really dumping them into a dead-end street without aspirations. We need to define the skills, training, and competency assessment requirements for each role. So as we're bringing people in, let's show them what are we going to do to train them into the role. We'll talk about coaching in a few moments. And then how are we going to assess against each of those line items competencies? So as management, we expect certain competencies, and we've got to show right up front how we're going to be measuring those. How are we going to manage performance in there? So let's clearly define it. Once again, take out any ambiguity. Let's have the processes, procedures, and the criteria for how individuals will be measured within each of those roles. This is an important one, and again, going back to the experience that I had back in the day with iChoices, access to self-learning and self-training. Make it easy, make it accessible to everyone. I recall going into that call center sometimes 6:37 a.m. in the morning, and couple of hours before startup and login time, to see agents sitting behind their terminals going through their self-training and self-learning, because they aspired to rise up to the next level within the organization. And I think if you make that self-learning, self-training available, we'll soon filter out those individuals who require a little bit more motivation, who require encouragement, and who can be rewarded for their efforts, and we'll soon enough identify those who will not rise above basic call center agent, and we know then not to invest too much energy and effort. And they're celebrating those successes, depending how your call center operates, but there should be mini celebrations. I wouldn't say every day, but at least once a week, that somebody has achieved something, whether it is a self-learning exercise or a course that has been completed, or a promotion to another level, or achievement of targets or KPIs. But let's celebrate those successes within the contact center operation as a whole. There are a whole lot of pre-recruitment assessment tools out there, and it's something we'll be talking about going forward. In the, let's call it the COVID recovery period, or the post-COVID period, or the new normal period, however we define that, we need to start really looking long and hard at how do we recruit, what sort of people do we bring into the organization, how do we motivate them, because they're going to be very different. And so I say regionally aligned pre-recruitment assessment tools, because the tools that are used in one part of the world are very different to those that might be used in others. Some organizations as well might have psychometric testing, and others might have more practical testing, etc. I think, and thanks, John. John Polden has just put in the chat line there, very important. Use performance-based incentives linked to all those KPIs we spoke about to drive contact center behavior. So in fact, one of our next sessions, I'm going to ask John to come in and briefly share some of his experience in using KPIs to really mold and to craft enhanced performance and behavior changes. So if we start talking about it as human capital performance, because yes, we're investing in our human capital, and so let's have a look at some of these points. And this is a summary. Define the job function clearly. And once again, I've got templates. I'll gladly help anybody wanting that. Show the career path. Make it visible, and encourage agents and anybody in the call center for that matter to strive to improve their role within the call center and their remuneration by following a specific career path. Pre-screen. Discover those personal driving dynamics, and those will come out of those assessment tools. And there are many different tools available, and we'll be looking at that in upcoming webinars as how we can actually discover the different driving dynamics. I'm sure people out there already, those who have work from home agents, are discovering that not everybody performs well work from home. At the same time, there are agents outperforming everybody else because they're more comfortable in a work from home environment. Small things, but big impact. Good induction training and onboarding, and I think many contact centers fall short here by simply dragging these youngsters into the contact center, pushing them through basic training, then into the operational firing line without sufficient knowledge, expertise, etc. I was looking at some stats fairly recently on a fairly big operation of the number of agents falling out and throwing in the towel in the early stages of training. And that's tragic, because there's a lot of time, effort, and money going into recruitment, and then to have them fall out in training because the agents suddenly realize that this is not an easy job. So let's invest more there. Product training, obviously, or the service behind it. Soft skills training, ongoing. Let's underline that. No good us simply putting them through the corporate training machine, bring them onto the floor, and then leaving them be. One of the things we found in that human capital survey was that those agents that stayed longer, so gave us longer tenure, performed better, and delivered better customer service, those were the ones that thrived on ongoing soft skills training, not just product training, enhancing their skills as professionals. There's your easy access to self-learning and development. Yes, supervisory and management techniques. This plays a massive role in driving staff retention and pushing down attrition rates. So very often we can identify contact centers that have particularly high attrition and staff turnover rates. Sadly, it's supervisor and management who are at fault there. Fair performance management and quality assurance is something we'll go on to in a few moments. Objective coaching, which I also talk about in the next section, and skills development. And then, of course, fair remuneration for the work being done. If we are paying sweatshop rates, we're going to get sweatshop performance. So once again, really important that we align our operation to market realities, market drivers, and if we're doing all the other functions here, we're going to have much better retention, certainly better performance, and better customer stats. Pleasant working environment. This is an important one. Very often, we in the call center environment are the last to get the new furniture and the new technologies and the refurbishment, etc. What I have seen in many instances where investments are made in the actual working environment, performance increases quite dramatically. One of the examples I had here was an insurance company outsourced to 14 different call centers their product sales. And what we were seeing in one contact center were very high conversion rates to sales, and in another contact center, same data, same script, same training, same everything, but much lower sales results. And we started moving people around between those contact centers, and even our top performers in one call center, put them in a tacky environment, their performance drops quite dramatically. So really important, let's look very carefully at the actual working environment and make sure it's conducive to driving performance. Right, any questions come up here? Yes, once again, thanks, John, for that input and that comment. And you're quite right. John says long handling times are often an indication of lack of or ineffective training and or soft skills. You're absolutely right, John, that the time that we invest, and the money for that matter, in training and soft skills, we can start measuring in reduced handling time and increased customer service satisfaction metrics as well. So it breaks my heart very often to see training budgets cut in an attempt to reduce overall operating costs, and yet the very act of cutting training costs can increase operating costs through inefficiencies. It's a very sad reality that. Any other comments coming in before we go? Okay, I tell you what, we've just over an hour now. I'm going to suggest we take a 3 or 4 minute break. So it's make a cup of coffee or visit the bathroom. So I'm just going to put it on hold. It's 11:08. So I'll pick it up in 3 minutes time. I'm just going to go off video and off, on mute, but please feel free also to come through on the chat line or the Q&A line. All right, here we go, 3 to 4 minutes. Okay, we're back. Any questions coming through? Feel free to put them in the chat box. And let's go to the next section. And here we'll be looking at quality assurance and performance optimization. So the two going hand in glove. So on the one hand, we're looking at performance measurements and metrics. And let's look at some of the concepts and principles around quality assurance. And this is an aspect of contact center operations that is changing quite dramatically in some instances, and I'll share with you some of the new trends in there happening. But what you might have seen when we discussed in session 1, the global trends, quality assurance has risen to right up there as the number 2 slot of importance in terms of operating contact centers. So with the drive towards customer experience, we can't hope to achieve high levels of customer experience unless we are investing a lot of time, effort, and energy and resources into quality assurance to get those performance figures where we want them. So every time I see this slide, I think every contact center, every company for that matter, would do well to put this Toyota definition up on the wall. And let's read through it there. Providing exactly what the customer wants, when the customer needs it, in the quantity and the expected sequence, without defects, with minimal effort, and at the lowest possible cost. I think that is brilliant. So no matter what our products are, whether it's financial services or airlines, if we adhere to this as our guiding light in defining our own quality definitions, I think we'll be doing well. And once again, I think it's really important that before we even discuss quality within our respective contact centers, let's define quality in the context of our business, not take somebody else's second-hand definition of quality. And I think that goes for many of our KPIs and standards, is refine them, tune them to become our standards. So an approach to QA, difficult. So first and foremost, ideally, quality within the contact center involves all areas of the organization. And we're seeing more and more now that where the contact center is becoming the touch point from all other contact points within the organization, from sales to marketing information, telemarketing, bookings, product sales, product usage, fault logging, etc., etc. All of those things, right the way through to retail, distribution, etc. The organization has many, many touch points. I'm quite sure everybody would agree, fairly pointless to drive high levels of quality within the contact center if the rest of the organization doesn't have the same philosophy. So we also need to start looking at quality where it's matured from not just agent performance, but monitoring and improving, wait for it, systems, system quality, process quality, recruitment, training, retention quality, access to information, business strategies and objectives. In other words, all areas that impact the agent's ability to provide quality services. So let's start thinking about QA as much bigger than simply a tick sheet relative to what the agent said or didn't say during the currency of a call. Tragically, QA has been just that in the past. What did the agent say on the call? Tick sheet, yes or no. It's much bigger than that. And pause for a moment and think, the quality of our systems, the quality of our processes, all of these add up to the ultimate customer experience. Also, the ultimate in operational efficiencies, effectiveness, and profitability in many cases of the organization as a whole. So we do need to have a much more holistic view of QA than has been the case in the past. So within the contact center, let's start bringing that down to what do we need to do as management to ensure that we start building this holistic view of quality. First and foremost, there's that shared understanding of why quality is important. We've seen so many cases where agents are penalized for failures within the QA environment, or they're falling below expectations, but they have a lack of understanding as to why it is so important. So we need to bring that into our onboarding, our induction processing, our training, and our ongoing skills development and training. Ideally, we have an organizational approach to quality improvement. As I mentioned, it's pointless simply doing a QA drive in the contact center if our colleagues in sales and distribution and service are dropping the ball constantly and driving irate customers into the call center if we're supposed to handle the problem. So ideally, this organizational approach, this of course demands that the philosophy, the strategies, QA strategies come from the boardroom at the highest possible level. Documented strategy processes and standards. So we need to start looking around, and do we have the appropriate documentation where we define very clearly what it is that we anticipate implementing in our contact center, or in our entire organization for that matter. What are the processes to ensure quality, and what are those standards that we need our people to adhere to? And lastly, a thorough understanding at all levels of what expected of each individual and or work group in the context of quality. So just like with KPIs, very clearly defined in terms of approach to quality, let's not have any ambiguity about, an agent thinks they delivered a quality call, but the team leader has a different view of it. We need to align those views, that we have a enterprise-wide understanding of what quality is. So not just cost-based strategy. In many cases, we've seen quality being the stick as opposed to the carrot. So call monitoring, voice recording is just the beginning. And there's a lot of exciting things happening in this space, which I'll share with you shortly. So, basically what we've been looking at as an industry over the last 40 years is we record the calls. In some cases, all of those calls. In other cases, only some calls are recorded. And we monitor even fewer, and I'll show you in a few seconds now. So if we are simply recording calls, okay, and looking at those KPIs, think of them as they are cost-based, cost per call, the number of calls handled, talk time, wrap-up time, average handling times, abandon rate, adherence to schedule, service level. You saw those on those previous charts. This is the kind of view of management if that's all we do. I'm not saying we shouldn't do all of these things. That's important. That's the good housekeeping. But it has very little to do with delivering quality in terms of customer experience. So it's the total customer experience that counts. These are component elements, but they're the good housekeeping components. So if we look at what's happened over 50 years in our industry, is random call monitoring. It's a reality. On average, less than 1% of all calls are monitored. In other words, somebody sits down and listens to them. And in most cases, it's all done evaluating average calls. And this is very sad, but it's a reality. So a typical bell curve here, if we take those 1% of our calls that we are listening to and assessing, we're going to find a small percentage of poor performance. In other words, high risk, low customer satisfaction, holds, transfers, no conversions if it's sales, repeat calls, and new customers, etc., etc. In other words, poor performance calls. Those calls also represent high risk interactions to the company, to the organization, brand, reputation, customer retention, etc. The other end of the scale, we have the ones that we really like to hear a lot more about, and these are our excellent calls: cross-sells, upsells, happy customers, customer advocacy, huge opportunities to drive revenue, to drive retention, to drive advocacy. But what's happening in here is we're only listening to a fraction of those calls. Now, if we just take, for example, the SABS standards that say we should assess a minimum of 8 calls per agent per month. Yeah, granted, some call centers are doing more than that, but the vast majority of contact centers are assessing less than 8 calls per month. The implications of that are actually quite frightening. Think about it. So if we take an average, and this figure of 23,000 calls per annum, this is an inbound customer service environment with call handling time of, let's say, 2 to 3 minutes. High volume, high demand. It would take between about 18,000 and 23,000 calls per annum. And that's 18 to 23,000 times a year that some young call center agent, maybe fresh out of school, has our brand, our product, our reputation on the line. It's quite frightening. So statistically, if we start playing with numbers, of these 8 calls, that's 0.4% of that number. Okay, 0.4. Only 2 will be poor performance calls, and only 1 will be a really good call. That's out of those 8 calls. And these in the middle are average calls. So if we did a pure random selection of our calls, and we had our QA people go through 8 of them per agent per month, we're going to pick up statistically 2, 1, and we're wasting a massive amount of time on these averages because these have very little business impact. Only these 3 calls, those 2 bad ones and that good call, in other words, 0.15% of that have business impact, positive or negative. Let that sink in for a moment, because this is frightening. Because what we do is contact centers, these random calls monitoring models drive decisions. 0.1% sample, we make far-reaching business decisions around, think about it, discipline, motivation, incentives and rewards, agent development, training, process improvement, product development, market assessment. I haven't even mentioned things like compliance, which is becoming more and more important right across all contact centers. So we as management are making, and executives, we are feeding them information to make decisions based on a sample of that. What about compliance and fraud detection? Big question mark, particularly if we're in financial services or any other contact center that is exposed to fraud and or the subject to compliance in terms of regulations or regulators, etc. So this is a snapshot of our typical world of QA for the last 45 years. So this is now the case for getting into interaction analytics and using technology to assess 100% of those calls. So what I'm bringing in here, and yes, I have to be transparent about it. This is one of my clients, and it's one of our sponsors of the MasterClass series. Is these slides come from Corby, which is the speech analytics. But I just wanted to touch on how it works, because this is the road to the future, in my personal opinion. So basically, one takes recordings, and those are ingested into a system that transcribes voice recordings into text. And that's the process there. That text is then indexed according to some very fancy algorithms, and then the operator or operations manager or QA manager, whoever it is, develops queries, builds words and phrases that they want to see the occurrence of those words and phrases, and then drives analytics from there. Oversimplified, but the next slide will expand on that slightly. So there it is. There's the interaction. There's the recording. It's transcribed. And then there are various language libraries. So different systems, but the one that I'm working with now, we do English, Afrikaans, Zulu, Sesotho, and that transcribes it into text. This is where we build queries. Then we get the analytics and the dashboards, and from that, the insights. So oversimplifying it here, for example, if this was a banking contact center, we would want to, in a query, for example, find out every time that a customer mentioned a competitive bank for whatever reason. Also, every time a customer threatened, I am going to leave or close my account, or words and phrases like that, which would slip through the random call selection process undetected. Fortunately, technology like this allows us to pick up on those words and phrases, and allows us to go to the next level, which is fully automated QA. And this is having tremendous implications right across the world, where we are now starting to lean heavily on automation and technology. So the first step, assuming we've recorded all the calls, etc., is what we call build a query. So this is words and phrases, and we have directories of literally hundreds of words and phrases for different industries. So we would have obviously approved greetings, the way in which we train our staff, and we'd be able to identify, did they or did they not use the approved greeting. For example, notification that calls are recorded. So we would pick out on words like calls recorded. Please note that calls are recorded, and put that into our queries. RPC, Right Party Connect. Typically in the collections environment, we need to make sure that the call center agent goes through the verification process and make sure that they're talking to the right person. Where it's a sales environment, there's an offer. We need to identify, did the agent make that offer, and was it accepted by the customer? Did the customer say yes or yeah, or some other way of indicating? FCR, and this is, Meza, you asked the question earlier about checking for first contact resolution. Typically, we're building a query here using technologies. We would train our agents and make it mandatory that at the end of the call, they would have to say or ask the customer, are you fully satisfied with the information I've provided you with, for example? And if the customer says yes, well, that's a tick in the box, and that's how we can measure first contact resolution. We might find some very clear wrap-up phrases that the agents must state during the currency of the call. So there is building queries. So there's a whole art and science to building queries. We would then start building scorecards. Now, if we go back to our normal QA scorecards, for example, calls are recorded. There's a call opening sequence. There's an offer acceptance. There's a first contact resolution. So we can take these words and phrases and we apply, typically as we would with a manual QA system, we would be able to define the weightings behind that. We then run the query. In other words, we scan every single call in and out of our call center for the last week, the last month, today, whatever it is, and we can segment it by calls, call types, by teams, by individuals, etc. And here you can see we are starting to get scores coming through. And here's Monty Joseph, good for him. He did 10 calls and he was 100% on the proper greeting. He was 100% on the ID number of the customer concern, whereas these others, poor old Terrell, he did not use the proper greeting and he did not ask for the customer's ID number. So very easy for a manager or a team leader, and there's the Excel extract from that. Oops, too fast. There's the Excel extract. We're actually able to look at the numbers. And so we can build queries across dozens and dozens of criteria and scan 100% of all of our calls and report very quickly those exceptions where agents are not following script, or they're not following compliance and regulatory statements, etc. This is a really, really exciting development in our industry, and I think it's rapidly changing the very nature of QA right across all industries. If anybody's interested, there's Colby, the facts and features, which I won't go into now, but it's low cost, high impact, very easy to deploy, and literally within weeks, users, contact centers are seeing an ROI. So enough of the commercials there, but really important to understand that automated QA and technology is having a massive impact on our industry going forward. Just some of the queries we might have on that is these speech analytics engines are very dependent on language libraries. So not every language has a library built around it yet. It is possible to build those libraries. It's quite time consuming and it's therefore costly. So in South Africa today, we have the four. We have English, Afrikaans, Zulu, and Sotho. Very soon, they'll be adding other vernacular languages. The company is also starting to do some work, for example, in Kenya, and building Swahili language libraries to be able to do that job. So I think our friend Meza sitting there in Addis from Ethiopia, we don't have Amharic language yet, but I'm quite sure it'll be with us one of these days. Quality alignment. So we've discussed then the first aspects of quality. So let's take a look at it here. Quality monitoring. Going back to some of our KPIs. So here is a abbreviated list of typical quality monitoring. We need to be looking at product knowledge, procedures, interaction skills, and the soft skills. Agent call control. Are they understanding how to stop a customer rambling on and taking up a lot of unnecessary time? Are they controlling that call? What are the business trends? And we can pick up a lot of this by monitoring those calls. Certainly agent behavior. And these tools, speech analytics tools, are allowing us to really understand agent behavior, use of language, etc. Also a source of market intelligence, and we can make a much longer list of those. Of some of those aspects that should come out of a quality alignment exercise. Customer surveys. Big question here is, are we surveying customers? And I'm not talking about just that one or two points that we might ask at the end of a call, but for every call that we are monitoring out here with customers, with agents, are we monitoring customers? Are we carrying out customer surveys by calling them specifically, and perhaps even outsourcing this to a research house to ask the very specifics about agent skills, first contact resolution, satisfaction with those resolutions, agent knowledge, courtesy, do they feel valued, net promoter scores, effort scores, etc., etc. Okay, that's the second component of quality alignment. And the third is our good housekeeping, wait times, wrap-up times, schedule adherence, all those other KPIs. And once again, we could make much longer lists of these. And so quality alignment is when we have a 360-degree view of all three of these components and their extended lists. That is where we're starting to get a very clear picture now of our contact center and how it is performing. Are we delivering the ultimate customer experience? Are our agents driving that positive experience? And are we managing our good housekeeping? So QA is a whole new game. It's not just a tick sheet with a few answers to it. This is a very contentious slide, and it's there just to stimulate some thinking about how perhaps our contact centers need to start looking at restructuring. We've had the typical hierarchical structure of call centers with call center manager, perhaps an assistant, and then supervisors, then perhaps team leaders, and then agents, and QAs off to the side. That's been the way we've built call centers for the 45, almost 50 years that I've been in call centers. So I throw this one out as a stimulation for constructive thought. So let's say we have our call center manager or our senior ops manager or senior executive, whatever it is, obviously admin support, etc. Now, if we follow me down on this side of the chart first, I'll come back to that shortly. This to me is production. It's like a factory. This is where we produce the goods. And we might have a call center manager or a channel or a service manager, but depending on the scale of the operation. And we would have our supervisors, our team leaders, and I'll come on to a discussion around this structure in a moment, and our agents. So this side of the equation is all about production. It's about efficiency. It's about delivering high quality services to our customers. But how do we do that? So in this particular model, and yes, it's built for a much larger operation. You can't do this on a small scale. Is that we call it I call it the quality optimization team. It could be one person, and in some cases you need 3 or 4. But this team manages. Let's start on this side. Technical support. Instead of technical support coming in and occupying call center managers' time and driving down here, this is where quality optimization ensures that the technology is being used of the highest quality. And that would include processes and all systems and reporting, etc., required in terms of technology. And here's our support coming through quality optimization, which is workforce management, reporting, MIS, analytics, etc. HR through there, HR support through quality, because is HR providing us with high quality recruits? Are they coming into the training environment? In other words, do we have the quality of the right people in this particular operation? I'm just checking, okay. And QA support is, are we using the right tools? And this is where we would put our internal QA team, or growing in popularity and in terms of practical sense is outsourcing large portions of QA. In some instances, 100% of QA is an outsourced function. So let's have a look at what is this indicating. This is saying that we've got an individual or a team reporting directly into the senior levels, responsible for the quality of these functions and the quality of these functions. It's also driving our skills development, because ultimately quality is driven by transferring that knowledge, those skills further down the line. So here is the skills transfer on a bi-directional basis. Here's the input from QA into skills development and training. Okay, now this is where it gets really contentious, and it assumes large budgets. So what I've done here is I have introduced into this model 2 dedicated coaches that fall directly under this quality team, if you look at the way it works there. And why have coaches, you ask? Because isn't that what supervisors do? Well, 30 years of auditing call centers shows me conclusively that supervisors, by and large, and there are exceptions, are not doing the coaching as effectively as it should be. And we'll have some discussion around what should a coach be doing. But we have seen contact centers where we have dedicated coaches who have the right credentials. In other words, they are essentially qualified as coaches. We are talking about life coaches, because essentially these coaches are not only dealing with performance issues based on KPIs. To get real optimization of your workforce, these coaches are also dealing with some of the emotional issues on a personal level and at agent level. So let's just talk about agents and coaches. And this is the relationship that is built up between the coach and the agent on scheduled weekly sessions that deal with some of the performance issues, as well as a lot of the other issues. And we've certainly seen it in high performance contact centers, where those coaches are assisting agents with life work relationships. It's relationships, it's about money, it's about financial management, it's about relationships with superiors. And unlike supervisors who occasionally might find a little bit of time to quickly squeeze in a quick coaching session, our dedicated coaches here have very specific functions and very specific KPIs needed to drive their performance. In other words, they set up these coaching sessions and they have to stick to them. These coaches, as well, as you can see here, also do coaching of team leaders and supervisors, and depending on the seniority of here, even up to call center managers. You know, business coaches are becoming more and more acceptable at a corporate level, because coaching drives performance. Coaching drives behavioral change. The last part of this model I wanted to discuss is, in some instances, some organizations purely have supervisors down to agents, or they might call them team leaders, and we put them above the agents. There's no really hard and fast rule about how many agents in terms of a chain of command, depending on the industry. So a high touch, high care environment might be a 1 supervisor or team leader to 8. In others, like directory inquiries contact center, you can have a team leader or supervisor managing a team of 20 or 30 or even more in some instances. But what we've done on a few sites is, in terms of an experiment, we split the roles of supervisor and team leader very clearly, re-looked at the competencies and roles and expectations for both supervisor and team leader, and separated them. So team leader becomes almost an assistant to a supervisor. And then, this was the sneaky trick. In the one site in particular, the team leader we saw as, and we defined it as a 1 to 2 hours a day function. And it's a working agent. So what we would do is we would take these agents up into that role for a week at a time to assist the supervisor. We saw very quickly those agents that were reluctant, they didn't feel that they had the competencies, or they just didn't feel like the extra work that was involved, and they declined the privilege of running a shift or a week as a team leader. Others grasped the opportunity with both hands and showed very quickly their potential management or supervisory skills. And so this was agent rotation into team leader role as a support function to supervisor. It's a motivator, it's a driver, it's an incentive, and it certainly allows management to identify which agents are worth investing in and which are worth performance managing out. So there are 2 concepts in this particular model that I ask you to have a look at: is the focus on quality and managing all aspects that drive quality in the call center, all under a single management structure. And the second component is splitting your organizational structure down here to allow for rotations. And the third concept is full-time, dedicated, and highly trained coaches. So let's not look at budgets in this instance, but the sites that I've seen this working on, yes, the upfront investment is quite high because these are senior people, particularly up here. There's a lot of change management necessary. These are also seen as additional headcount and therefore expensive. And yet, when put into place, agent retention and staff retention climbs quite dramatically. Staff turnover drops dramatically. We see greater performance across everybody in the operations, and fundamentally we start seeing costs reducing quite dramatically. So it's a very interesting model. Big question, if we're talking about QA, does a call center agent make a great assessor? And the short answer is absolutely not. Two different skill sets, very, very different. That's one of the big problems we see is we have good agents and they might threaten to leave or move on and leave the organization. And we say, don't worry, we're going to make you a QA. Big mistake in most instances. So great QA skills can be taught if it's the right person. So let's just put that in our thinking processes there. So what we don't want from our QA function, and this is sadly the way it's been for many, many years, is this big brother. Judgmental, aggressive, superior knowledge is power, lazy, not approachable, friends with the frontline agents. This can lead to massive shenanigans or corruption in call centers where undisciplined QA people can score higher for their friends in the front line in return for favors. Let's not go into the details of that, but this is typically what we see in toxic call centers. So if any of these we can see in our contact center, we have a problem. We have a big problem, okay? Which brings us into the coaching aspect of it now. So it's a bit of a long statement here. Coaching, an interactive conversation between the coach and the coachee to generate shifts in the consciousness, okay, leaving the coachee complete as well as empowered and inspired to make positive changes. Long phrase or long sentence, but basically what it's saying is effective coaching changes attitudes and behaviors and can drive and should drive and must drive increased performance. That's what a coach is, not a function that a supervisor who's too busy looking at production and service levels and staffing and manpower and rostering and disciplining and all those other things to sit down and build a close personal relationship with an agent in order to change their behaviors. I'm not suggesting that supervisors don't do coaching altogether. What I call situation and operational coaching is a different thing. An agent has a bad call, immediately supervisor needs to jump in and coach appropriate to that call. But the longer term professional coaching that I refer to follows these models. Art of facilitating performance, learning and development of another. Once again, that research that I mentioned earlier clearly indicated that where we have an ongoing relationship with our staff and we are driving professionally performance, we are increasing learning and we're developing them as individuals, they stay longer and they definitely perform better. Ongoing partnership that helps coachees produce fulfilling results in their personal and professional lives. Really important. We expect so much of our frontline workers without really understanding what's happening in their personal lives. And this is where that dedicated coach can go a long way towards increasing those performance and tenure as well. So coachees develop deep in their learning, improve their performance. So expensive, yes, but I would put money on it that we could prove conclusively in a very short space of time that this approach produces significant cost benefits to the organization. We go back to just a high level view of the total quality management. If we adopt the total quality management philosophies and principles, it allows the entire organization to streamline those service strategies and the operational realities at the rock face. And the ability to measure improvement or the decline in the customer experience. You know, we glibly say we're striving to achieve the best customer experience, but how do we do it? We ask a few questions about customer satisfaction and we assume that that's the be all and end all. It's not. It's really just the beginning of it. When we start looking at quality from a different through a different lens, we start seeing the flaws in our overall service delivery, from the very nature of the products and services that we are providing, to the processes, the procedures, the obstacles to acquire, purchase, buy, or use the products, etc. So total quality management will highlight these flaws in our overall operation. Many of these may not be able to be cured within the call center, but once again, this is where the call center feeds these findings and these insights back into the organizational structures as business intelligence. And this is where we start looking at the area of performance, departmental, high performance, low performance. Some cases it's a team, some cases it's an individual. But total quality management identifies these and allows us to take remedial actions. So my good friends at an organization called BYC, who are quality specialists and also specializing in outsource quality. And this kind of sums it up when you think about where we need to look in our organization. Recruitment, delivering the right people. In other words, the quality. Training, the quality of our training. Is our training department or team delivering us the right people? Our operations, managing our resources effectively. Finance, business models and assumptions. And this is where our cost per call, cost per interaction, cost by type, etc. comes to play. So it's the quality of our financial modeling. Processes. You give me 2 days in a call center and the ability to re-engineer those processes, and I'll give you a 10% productivity and improvement, cost-saving improvement. Shoddy, old processes that haven't been subjected to quality assessment may well be holding back your operation. Product match and database. And this really goes to, are we talking to the right customers? Are we? What is our internal quality of our data, customer data? Customer complaints, are we monitoring those effectively, efficiently? Are we seeing the number of complaints declining? In other words, the quality of our complaint management system. And there's our first time resolution. Is it increasing? Because this is the quality of our relationship with our customers. Our overall operation, gaining efficiency and effective from quality monitoring. So there are 9 areas that we need to apply ourselves to with the lens of quality within that work environment. If you go back to that organizational structure that I had, the quality team or the quality manager would have a responsibility to deliver and to monitor across all 9 of those areas. Quality optimization, the holistic operating model. So this is very high level stuff. Obviously, interaction recording, not just the voice. We want to see screens, we want to see emails, we want to see text messages. We want to record everything. We need to put into place the tools to do cross-channel interaction analytics. Another subject for another day, but once again, technologies have developed to such a point where we are able to really see what's happening across high volumes, across all of those channels. And then apply, as you saw in the example I gave you earlier, quality monitoring across all of those channels, using different tools to do that. But no good taking our 0.15% of all of our interactions and basing our business strategies on that minuscule sample. Performance management, and that's really the skill of the contact center manager and his or her team of supervisors and team leaders and analysts to find flaws in the delivery of our services and to refine them and to build them. Real-time process optimization. Processes need to change. If a situation occurs in the contact center and we are stuck with a process that could not be optimized or changed on the fly, we could really be in serious trouble. The world moves far too fast to have static processes in place. Workforce management. any an analysis or benchmark report that you read nowadays, and going back for many years now, up to 80% of the total cost of managing or operating a contact center is in the manpower, salaries, wages, etc., etc. The infrastructure, telephony, technologies are relatively minor costs. I'm not saying they to be ignored, but 80% of your costs are here in the workforce. And so anything and everything that can be done to reduce the headcount, to drive up efficiencies, and maintain high levels of customer satisfaction and the customer experience, that's where a lot of the focus has to be. So these are the roads to success. And there's your real-time customer feedback. This is the piece that many contact centers fail to do. We discipline and we manage and micromanage our staff, etc., but we very seldom engage directly with the customer. It's been my experience that a lot of contact centers drive their strategies, processes, procedures, training, etc., on what they think the customer expects. Pause on that one. What they think the customer expects. It's an assumption. We need to put into place the process, procedures, systems, methods to make sure that we're getting that real-time customer feedback and know what the customer is. So, quality assurance, fundamental to delivering customer experience. We must apply it across all channels, omni-channel and all processes. Organizational structure designed to focus on quality. Back to my earlier contentious model. Two different skills, and let's not confuse them. And we'll go on to another session when we look at manpower and manpower development in a future session. And we've got lots of technologies nowadays available to assist us in managing and whether it is quality assurance or data analytics, it's all there out there. So any questions on that? We've just about come to the end of this particular session, but if there are any questions, I'd like, the floor is open. Let's say, John, come on, you must have one more question for me. If we just close on it. Okay, and this is really where we just once again say, Meze, kindly answer the first question, which was about first contact resolution. Meze, there are so many different ways of creating models and tools to drill down and really start measuring first contact resolution. And I think really this is where we need to start looking individually at, in your particular case, an airline reservations and customer service center. We need to really define what customers do expect, because we've got to measure in terms of what the customers expect on the one hand, as well as looking after all the other KPIs. But Meze, I'll come back to you with some very specific ideas I might have in your environment. Is the analytics on other channels? Yes, indeed, Meze. There's some very sophisticated tools that allow us to measure interactions across text-based channels, voice-based channels, etc. I am putting together under the technology section, which comes up in a few weeks' time, a whole section on data analytics, and I've got some good friends in that industry who are sharing some case studies with us, and you'll start seeing how powerful it is to drill down and to use the tools appropriately. So with that, just once again, word of thanks to sponsors. Without them, we simply couldn't do these sessions. So Corby, thank you very much for their inputs. Smart Solutions, if you're really looking for a very powerful contact center platform in rands and not dollars, have a look at Smarts. IntelliBPO, a very sophisticated BPO operation driving digital change. And my good friends Axtel Headsets for providing this headset that I'm using now. And if you need headsets, please engage with them. Right, next session, Tuesday, December the 1st, and I think that'll be the last one for the year. I am in the process of building some new content, really up-to-date stuff during the holiday period. So by the time we kick off in the new year, we'll have a lot more new information. I'm also going to start inviting some specialists in to co-present with me on certain topics, and so it'll make it even more exciting. So please get your colleagues, friends, business associates to register for the webinar series or the masterclass series, and look forward to seeing you all back again for the last session for the year next Tuesday. So thank you very much, everybody, and stay well, stay safe, have a great week.